G'day mates, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Grand Royale is now over and I want to make the argument that this was the best FNCS finals we have ever had. I want to talk about how the double point day 2 format actually led to one of the most entertaining days of Fortnite I think we've ever had. Can we now crown Tayson the best player of all time? Does Bugha hold on to that title now that he's won World Cup and 2 FNCSs back to back? We had Miro even in his winning moment apologizing for what happened with Muzz. We had Kami's team just falling short on EU. We had Ree's team in the final game of NA West closing it out to go back to back. There's so much to talk about. Let's just jump into it. Before I get into talking about specific regions and who won, I want to talk about Grand Royale as a whole because I sincerely believe this finals weekend may be one of the best finals weekends we've ever had from an FNCS. Now, let me clarify. I know there's been huge performances in the past that are maybe more memorable for one region, like let's say Mongrel, Mitro, and Tayson winning Season 4. Maybe, Benji, Mitro, Mongrel's run during the early days of Season X. Like, there's been other FNCS finals that have maybe been more hyped for one region, but I think across the board, across all the regions, especially EU, NA East, and NA West, 3 of the main regions, this was the closest and most exciting finals I have ever watched. I watched all 3 regions back to back to back. It was like an 11-hour stream, and honestly, it was so intense the whole way through. And this raises the question about this double point format. How good was the double point format on day 2? Because originally I was a bit skeptical, but I've been saying the same thing. Look, while it doesn't look the best for the players, I'm going to understand why the players are frustrated. As a viewer, it could be quite exciting, and oh man, was it exciting. It made the games so intense today. So at this point, it's kind of hard, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you think this double point format on day 2 should stay, or should it go? And there's 2 main arguments here. I do understand why some pros would be upset. For example, Thomas HD, Queasy, and Nas, I'll talk about, all the teams in a little bit. They lost $180,000 because of the day 2 format being double points. If day 2 was worth normal amount of points, they would have placed far, far higher. But then the argument comes out, well, everyone had the same possibility for points though. It's not like only some teams got double points, everyone got double points. But then people arguing, it kind of makes the game feel a bit more RNG because, to be honest, all the teams were really playing pretty similar. I don't think any teams were going too crazy and going for huge point games on day 2. Like, there wasn't teams just straight keying really uncharacteristically to day 1. Like, the games looked just as stacked between day 1 and day 2. So you could argue it was just a bit of RNG on whether you played better on day 1 versus day 2, but overall, I think as a spectator, you could see why it's exciting because coming into day 2, it literally meant that anyone could win. Like, anyone could come back, and because the existing points meant less, it meant that towards the end of the tournament, there was actually quite a few teams that were really close together. When they were going into the final games, if there was even a 40-point difference between first and second, which previously pretty much meant the tournament was over, it was actually really close because a win's worth 60 and elims are worth 4. So when a 10 elim wins 100 points, it really made every game feel super intense. So at this point, I could take it either way. From a viewing partier and from a spectator standpoint, double points is awesome, but I fully understand that if all the pros really, really disliked it, you've got to cater to the pros at the end of the day. Yes, it makes it cool to spectate, but if the pros aren't playing, then there's nothing to spectate. But I don't think the pros were outwardly super upset. Like, I really didn't see that many complaints about the format. I saw some here and there, and if you look at the finals leaderboards like we're about to do, the top 4 or 5 teams in all the major regions were insane. Like, they were the best teams, and they were the teams everyone expected to do well. So it wasn't like, this format somehow made all these teams that usually do terrible all of a sudden pop off. Like, just look at who won the regions. It was the best teams going into the finals. So I don't know. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on it as well. But I also want to say that I don't think I've felt this much excitement and this much hype for what is next in Fortnite in a really long time. And I genuinely believe that with Chapter 3 potentially around the corner, us being like 99% sure Chapter 3 is next, we now have what looks like it's going to be a really cool competitive season. We're switching up to duos, LAN events coming back, daily events coming back, Epic really putting in a lot of effort. The general sense of excitement right now is so high, and I think a lot of it was due to this Grand Royale. The qualifying format was absolute garbage. I don't want to hear anyone say that, oh, well, the qualifying format we said was bad, but look how good the finals were. The games were going to be good in the finals regardless. There was $6 million on the line. Everyone was playing their hearts out. The qualifying format did not make that. If they spread out the qualifying format, we maybe would have had even better teams, and it would have made that part of the tournament enjoyable. But focusing on the positives, the finals were great. And because of fantastic finals, now going into all that hype, it really seems like as a community, pros and casuals, I genuinely feel more excitement right now going into what's next for Fortnite than I have in multiple seasons, in a really, really long time. We've just come out of, we haven't come out of COVID, but it seems like Epic is now getting their workforce mobilized again. It seems like a lot of the constraints of working from home and the early constraints of COVID are starting to lift, and they're really putting in more effort again. And before I talked about, actual teams' performances and how Grand Royale went, I wanted to share those thoughts and get your guys' opinions. Do you feel the same? Because I'm excited right now, man. Now, let's go to the actual leaderboards, talk about what happened in case you missed any of it, because, man, like I said, this finals was intense. Straight up, out of EU, kicking it off, we had Guild Hen, Falcon Tayson, and Falcon Chapix take out the $600,000 first place on 579 points, 12 matches played, and 3 wins, with an average elims of 5.5 and an average placement of 6.25. Absolutely ridiculous average placement. And they played so well. This now makes Tayson the 4 times FNCS champ on EU, 2 solos and 2 trios now. Absolutely phenomenal. It also makes Hen and Chapix the 2 times FNCS champs, and it all came down to the last game. Going into the last game, the leaderboard was so incredibly close. Almost anyone could take it, and the last game was insane. We had Tayson's team go down in 12th place in first, which opened it up for Seti, Kami, Teak, who was still in the lobby as a full trio, and Queasy and Nas and Thomas HD, who was still in the game as well, on high ground. But unfortunately, 2 absolutely disastrous moves from Seti and Teak. Seti and Kami really did hurt this team. It was so unfortunate to see. We saw that Kami actually had pre-edited floors. He went to move out, tried to build a floor, and he fell and died. And then following this a little bit later, I think just a bit of a brain explosion from Seti. I think he was trying to edit a floor to spray down. Unfortunately, he fell as well. So we had Teak trying to close it out as a solo, but luckily for Seti and Kami, them falling didn't cost them anything more than at least potentially first place. I think at that point in the game, they would have had to eliminate almost every remaining player and get the win to be able to take out first place. And they had Queasy, Nas, and Thomas on high ground above them. So really, really unfortunate for them, but I wonder how much it actually cost them and whether they could have won. We had Queasy, Nas, and Thomas HD manage to take that last game with a 14 elim win in their very last game, but unfortunately it was not enough. They did not get first, but they got the 3rd place overall. Still a huge, huge performance for them. Like I said originally, if there was no double points on day 2, Queasy and Nas and Thomas HD would have actually come 2nd place. Kami, Seti, Teak would have come 3rd. But again, overall, you can take it how you want. Both teams had the same opportunity for points on day 2 as well. Kami, Seti, and Teak just played absolutely phenomenally on day 2. You can't take it away from them. FNCS winners, and then almost back-to-back Grand Royale. Still super impressive. I mean, $450,000 richer. They're going to be very happy. Also worth mentioning now, this firmly cements Tayson as the most online earnings of any player. Tayson has now made $720,000 just from online tournaments. Absolutely ridiculous. We had Vidil, Janice, and Noah Riley coming in 4th. They got 489 points. We had Safik, Lucia, and Putri coming in 5th on 440. We had Link's team in 6th. We had Crow in 7th. We had Kefi's team, unfortunately, the other Polish team that was going into day 2 in such a good spot. I believe 2nd place overall. Unfortunately, fell down the leaderboard into 8th. We had Floiz's team, who I was really hopeful to come back with a huge day 2 out of Lazy, coming in 9th. We then had Shady's team in 10th. I'm not going to go through the whole leaderboard, but we did have Andretta, Benji, and Savage. The dream of them coming back with the huge comeback on day 2 unfortunately didn't come true. Worth mentioning though, it was at the end of day 2 that we actually saw Malibuca's team leave. Malibuca left with 2 games to go on day 2 after having not a great performance out of the stacks. Second last game, they dropped on Corny. They had a phenomenal game. They caught the team of Corny off guard. I believe it was Pink's team, wiped them on spawn, and went on to have a really good game. I guess they liked that element of surprise, because despite game 11 working really well for them at Corny, game 12, they actually went to Holy Hedges. Unfortunately, met with a bit more resistance, and they went down on spawn. But it opened that whole discussion now of why didn't they leave earlier? And it's one that I don't want to get too much into because it always leads to negatives. We had some pros saying it was weird because once you'd already dropped there and you'd honestly kind of thrown or really hurt multiple FNCSs, building up that reputation of being a pro team that won't leave. And that's what pros talk about. That's why pros don't want to leave their drop. They don't want to be known as teams that, run away from fights, because then they'll get dropped on in the future. But now with 2 games left in the tournament, you ruin that reputation. But then some other pros saying that trios is almost over now, we're going to duos, it won't really matter. But then my logic is, if you didn't care about that reputation so much, I feel like they should have just left on day one or maybe at the start of day two. But it's all done now. We have Steamy Stacks. Potentially, that's going to be the last set lobby tournament we see with Steamy Stacks, and it could be the last set lobby we see of trios. Maybe we never come back to trios, so maybe it didn't matter in the end. It was unfortunate to see Benji's team have yet again another FNCS throne. I think that's, what, 4 from Endretta now out of Steamy Stacks, where you just have to think that he's been contested, I think, 4 of the 5 times he's been there, or 3 of the 4 at least. It's rough to see, but it was a fantastic finals overall. The biggest sad part about day 2 was Save It, Amplify, and Matzo. They started getting dropped on day 2, and they just did not handle it. They ended up getting in their last few games 32nd, 33rd, 33rd, 30th, and 30th place back to back. So it was disheartening to see for a team that was 5th place going into day 2 to then drop down to 23rd overall. It was really unfortunate. Again, it raised a whole bunch of drama for the team that was dropping on them, but again, it's a team that have been going Coral Castle for a long time in scrims. They're known to go there, and I wanted to try to reiterate or try to I want to talk about the terminology of griefing. When I use the word griefing, I know sometimes I'll throw it around by accident. I try to use it only to specifically mean when a team is deliberately negatively impacting their own game to deliberately negatively impact someone else. If a team starts dropping on someone because they truly think it's a better chance for them to do well in the finals, which the team that ended up doing it ended up getting a top 6 place because they switched their drop spot to Coral Castle, that isn't griefing. Just because it negatively impacts Save It, and I really love Save It, Amplify, Matzo is one of my favorite teams. I'm so sorry it happened to them. It was ultimately a really good decision by the team that switched, and they ended up making tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars because of it. Moving on to NA East, we had our first back-to-back FNCS and Grand Royale winning team of anyone I've talked about today. We had Miro, Bugha, and Dukes taking out first place on 524 points, 12 matches, 1 win, with an average elims of 5.08 and an average placement of 8.75. You'll notice the NA points are a fair bit lower than the EU points across the board. This is because I also didn't mention this. EU's top 4 teams managed to get 11 of the 12 victory royales. So 11 of the 12 wins went to the top 4 teams on EU. NA East didn't exactly have that record, as you can see, so the points are a little bit more spread out, but huge performance from Miro, Bugha. I mean, obviously they copped a lot of heat for dropping Muzz. You know, a lot of people still upset with them about that. I did see them getting still a lot of negative feedback and a bit of hate when they still won. They managed to prove that picking up Dukes was a good decision. They went on to win the Grand Royale. The argument still stands whether they could have done it with Muzz, but I also wanted to mention, and I wanted to show that Miro, even in his winning moment, did take the time aside to mention that what they did was wrong and show a lot of appreciation and a lot of sympathy for Muzz. Miro tweeted out, "We deserve the hate we got for dropping Muzz. The way it happened wasn't supposed to happen. Muzz is a crazy ass solo, trio, duo player. Nothing but love for Muzz, and he will continue to do big things in the future." Miro also going on to reply to one of Muzz's tweets where Muzz was really upset after Grand Royale, talking about how good he is and how he's come to this region and done things that no one else could do, and really took the time and the effort to try to lift up Muzz. And I like that. Muzz is one of my closest friends in the scene. I feel bad about what happened to him, and like Miro said, it shouldn't have been handled that way, but at the end of the day, I want to focus on the positives, and Miro and Bugha went on to win Grand Royale, with Dukes getting $285,000. So as upset as you might be if you're a Muzz fan, they went on to win. We're talking about back-to-back wins. We've also got back-to-back seconds. We have Jamper Day and Tragics getting second place, FNCS, and now Grand Royale netting $210,000 on 472 points. This team played phenomenally, and I feel like especially Tragics really stepped up today. This team's biggest issue is always going to be their surge coming out of Dirty Docks. It's always the biggest issue with Dirty Docks. It's been the story of Day for a really long time. Reverse 2K Day and Miro back in the day having to just full send on the first trio they could find anywhere near the edge of zone to get their surge up, and unfortunately now with Kami split, the area right next to them having slipstream, so they rotate even faster, really difficult for this team. But Tragics with that auto sniper was stepping up absolutely massive today with the charge and endgame, absolutely dominating. I'm only shouting out Tragics specifically because I feel like whenever Jamper Day and Tragics do well, because of Day being, you know, one of the most well-known and one of the most respected fraggers, I think a lot of people assume that Day is just putting the fragging on his back and Tragics is just there, but Tragics was was more than pulling his weight today and absolutely clutching up. Day obviously is Day. He is always going to go ridiculous, and I think it's so funny now that Bugha and Jampa, first and second, two players who, you know, have always kind of gone from IGLing, not IGLing, I don't want to IGL, maybe I will IGL, to now being two of the most, if not most consistent IGLs in NA East right now is just crazy to me. They played so well. We had the FNCS champs Slackjack and Acorn in third on 449, walking away with $126,000. And then we had a team you probably weren't expecting to see there, Bucky, Peterbot, and Macwood. And I say you probably weren't expecting to see them there because closing out day one, they were in 19th place. 19th place in day one to then finish 4th in day two, only 3 points less than 1 elim away from 3rd. They almost went from 19th to a podium finish in a single day, and that's why I'm a huge fan of the day 2 format. It was so exciting seeing this team clutch up and go massive. Buck even made a tweet yesterday talking about retirement. Didn't know if that was real, but after being in 19th place, I guess they were pretty down, weren't feeling too great. I'm sure Bucky's feeling very, very good now. They clutched up massively. We also had Cease Cold and Elite, a team that I talked about and featured heavily in yesterday's video. Also only 2 elims from a top 3. They came 5th overall. You're probably wondering, did they pull off the crazy, you know, Shadow Cube pad play that I talked about? They did start doing it. They did it so many times and they got so infamous for doing it that we even had Blake going out of his way to get rid of all of the Shadow Cubes at the area where Cease would then use the Shadow Cubes to rotate in. This opened up a whole nother discussion. Why is Blake griefing Cease? And again, I have to say, Blake's drop spot is already right on top of those Shadow Cubes. They take about 10 seconds to get all of them. It really doesn't take that long. And Blake's team was one of the teams that got landed on by Cease because that's just where their rotate path put them. So spending a couple of minutes to deny your enemies the resources to come and kill you is not griefing. That is just smart for your tournament. It unfortunately did affect Cease a little bit, but I was so impressed with the way that Cease led his team. They would do different zone strats. They would play in zone, they would find other Shadow Cubes, they would then heal. Like, the way Cease played Coral Castle was amazing. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, it only worked because of the Shadow Cubes and the pads. Yeah, it did, but Cease figured that out. He figured out an entire playstyle around those Shadow Cubes and pads, and even when it didn't come down to just landing on people's heads, he played it incredibly smart. So I know people are going to try and take it away from Cease. A lot of people don't give Cease enough respect these days compared to what he used to get, but honestly, from watching them play, I was super impressed at how well Cease knew his drop spot and how well he knew the rotates and the strategies. We also had Commandment, Centered, and Stretch in 6th place on 442, only 1 point behind 5th, only 4 points behind 4th, and 7 points behind 3rd. Remember, that's 2 elims. So right now, you had 2 elims separating 3rd from 6th. So this day 2 format with double points didn't blow the leaderboard way out. It made it incredibly close. It was really exciting. We had Niddle, Casca, and Cloud Energy in 7th. We had Aegis, Saf, and Kanata in 8th. DJ and Nosh Iomzo in 9th, D-Roller, Spegu, and Charlie in 10th. And again, I'm not going to read the whole leaderboard through. Unfortunately, we did have Zlem, TK, and Chucky fall from 1st at the end of day 1 with over a 50-point lead into 12th. They had a pretty disastrous day 2, let's be honest. It kicked off with a 31st place, 19th place, 26th place, 23rd place, 24th place, 21st place. Now, I love this team. I think they did phenomenally. It was just, I think a combination of the nerves got to them on day 2, knowing it was double point format, they could lose their lead, and also the playstyle they were using day 1, it's just hard to replicate. They were just going super crazy, pushing every team, taking 3v3 fights to get their surge. They didn't really have a set plan for how to get surge at range and how to rotate and set up. They were just relying on their superior fighting. And when it comes to finals, as you guys know, that's a very hard playstyle to replicate. Teams have done well one day or maybe won finals that playstyle, but quite often it's going to catch up to you. Other than that, across the board, it was a really good tournament. We saw Muzz, Joji, and Rokane come back a little bit on day 2. They actually opened up the tournament with an 11 elim second, and it's because they got their own drop spot. They were obviously contesting Mega and Dubs over at Boney Burbs. They ended up being able to leave that drop spot because Nounzy unfortunately had his motherboard break the day of day 2 finals. So Nounzy, Nico, and Polarized were not able to play a single game on day 2, and Muzz ended up taking their drop spot, which is the IO base on the hill over near Boney. So they ended up doing much better with that drop spot, but unfortunately, even with a double points day 2, was not able to have a huge comeback. But NA East was incredibly stacked. It was a phenomenal tournament to watch. Now, moving on to NA West, and this one was a roller coaster. I mean, as a viewer, we have to thank Outrp and Epic Whale at this point for always putting on a spectacle. This team always leaves it till the last day, the last minute to clutch up for the win, for the entertainment. They never just run away with it, but they almost always win. We had Outrp, Reed, and Epic Whale taking out first place on 581 points. That might look like a big difference between them and Poffy's team in second on 548, but it was because they won the last game. It came down to a 9 elim win, but in that very last game, going on to rotating zones, we had Outrp and Reed as a duo. Epic Whale went down. Poffy was a full trio, then Poffy was a solo. It was crazy. It was so incredibly close, but we now have Outrp and Epic Whale as the 6-time FNCS champs, and we have Reed going back-to-back FNCS and Grand Royale, proving why he wasn't going to play with Fabs and Snacky. A lot of people question that. Some people understand him because Outrp and Epic Whale are Outrp and Epic Whale, but at one point, remember, going into day 2, we had Reed beneath Fav's team, and also throughout the days, I think we saw Reed fall as low as 5th place, so things were not secure by any means. It became a huge comeback if you look at their day 2, because this is just what, you know, Outrp and Epic Whale are used to doing on day 2. Started off with a 3 elim 12th, which is a little bit shaky, but then it was a 7 elim 3rd, 6 elim 3rd, 10 elim 5th, 5 elim 5th, and a 9 elim win, meaning that on day 2, they were first place overall on 426 points, over 70 points clear of Poffy. So it came down to the day 2 and it came down to the double points, but that's just what you expect from Outrp and Epic Whale, and obviously Reed is now no difference. Huge respect to Poffy though, an absolute underrated team. Poffy, I believe it's Scissor is how you pronounce it, and Eclipse getting 2nd place on 548. They gave the most dominant team we've seen on West almost ever a run for their money. At one point there, it looked like Reed, Outrp, and Epic Whale were not going to win West, so massive respect to Poffy's team. We had Yelty, Krizux, and Andy in 3rd on 454. It's great to see the Hispanic team up there. Yelty was pulling insane viewers, I think like 50,000-60,000 viewers during the finals. The Hispanic community goes crazy every single time Yelty shows up, and it was awesome to see him get a podium finish. We had Godku, Glace, and Fekoy in 4th on 440. We had Midi, Nico, and Chris, and this is unfortunate. Midi really upset with himself. Last game, they were looking really good to close it out in maybe a top 3, top 4. Unfortunately, coming 5th place because Midi did open an edit and got completely 3-2-1 beamed and deleted, but I don't think it was Midi's fault. I truly think it's just one of those situations. The auto sniper just hits way too hard. So head up to Midi, is one of my favorite people on the scene. Still a really good performance in 5th place. We had Quinn, Wave, and Kuel, who went into day 2, I believe, in top 3, unfortunately falling down into 6th place, and again, it was because Quinn was contested. Quinn has now had this, I don't know what it is about Steamy Stacks. Steamy Stacks just always turns into this giant just spawn fight mess, and it's just always just drags in at least 1 or 2 good teams and usually seems to throw their FNCS. But 6th place, still phenomenal by Quinn, and I was so impressed when, even when Quinn disengaged, or even when Dragon's team disengaged who Quinn was versing, they would still go on to get Surge, get loot, and play out the game really well. Honestly, I was so impressed with how Quinn played this finals. If they had an uncon Steamy, I truly think they could have given first place a run for their money, or at the very least would have got top 3. We also had Fratby's team, we had Grimm's team, we had Rex, Fabs, and Snacky in 9th overall. Super upset. We even had, I believe it was Snacky or Fabs tweeting out, not a fan of the double point day 2 format, saying they should have come 3rd overall if the point format was the same. So unfortunate for them. We had Kenshi's team in 10th, and honestly, West was so exciting to watch this time around. I love that it wasn't just a Reed, Outrp, Epic Whale runaway. It literally came down not to the last game, it came down to the last minute. Both teams still alive, 1st and 2nd, close on the leaderboard, and unfortunately Poffy's team just falling down. I believe it was in 3rd place, and that was when Reed's team jumped ahead by those 40 points. But hey, it was an exciting tournament. I also want to talk about a crazy coincidence. I know it's just stats, it doesn't mean anything, but I thought it was super interesting that the EU and NA East winning team both had the exact same amount of FNCS wins now. Tayson has 4, Chapix has 2, Hen has 2, and now we have Mira with 4, Dukes with 2, and Bugha with 2. And not only that, going into day 2, all 3 winners, NA East, EU, and NA West, were all in 3rd place, and then they ended up taking out 1st. Just some weird stats. I thought it was cool. And that's it for trios FNCS, I guess. We now have a couple cash cups. I think we have a cash cup extra before the season's over, but that's it for trios now. And honestly, it's been really cool for the storylines. I'm excited to build some more up, and I think the storylines we've built in this FNCS will still continue, but we now have Tayson getting 4 FNCS wins on EU, making him the best player since World Cup. I feel like you just have to agree with that. But then if we're going to say best player of all time, we now have Bugha closing out the FNCS with 2 back-to-back wins on top of, if we're going to go back to World Cup, clearly that has to count for something. We now have, Reet winning back-to-back FNCS and Grand Royale. We also have Miro winning back-to-back FNCS Grand Royale. So does that make Miro the best controller player right now? But Reet's winning, multi-region cash cups across everything, just winning anything he plays right now. I really think this was such a good competitive season and such a good way to close it out. But trios is over now. We're focusing on duos, and I think a lot of these conversations will still go into duos. And if you guys haven't seen, we have some of the most ridiculous duos already forming. I'm probably going to make a video in maybe like a week or so once it all solidifies, talking about my favorite duos. But we already now have Stretch and Commandment, saying they're going to play together again. But we now have new duos like Miro and Scented. So it's already started. Like, I am so ready and so hyped for duos. I don't want to talk about it yet because I want to do one in a little bit, maybe like a week or so once all the duos come out, and then maybe do a follow-up one because of course it'll change before next season. Let me know if you want a duos video to start getting hyped for duos. But trios is over, and I'm gonna miss it a little bit because I think it was so cool, the storylines we've built up, but I'm really ready for a change. All right, guys, if you liked the video, please chuck a like on it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.